The first thing Vell noticed were the knuckles swollen, purplish, crusted over in some spots. The human's right hand was curled absently around the edge of the cafeteria tray, fingers twitching like they still remembered the impact. "You are injured," Vell said, antennae angling forward as he stared. The human, Daniel Rourke, didn't look up from his food. "I tripped. It's nothing," Vell tilted his head. "Your explanation is statistically improbable. You would have to fall at velocity sufficient to damage multiple knuckles on one hand while—" "Vell," Daniel interrupted. "It's just a bruise, I'm fine." Vell did not believe that. Not because he thought Daniel was lying maliciously, but because humans, as he had come to learn during his semester at the Cross-Species Cultural Academy, had a bizarre relationship with pain. They minimized it. They laughed through it. And worst of all, they pretended to be fine when they were clearly not. Later that day, Vell found himself in Professor Herricks's comparative physiology class, seated beside Daniel again. The human's hand remained clenched in his lap, unreadable. The lecture droned on about circulatory differences between species, but Vell's gaze kept drifting toward that hand. At the end of class, Vell decided not to ask again. He would observe instead. The next morning, Daniel didn't show up to interstellar political models. Nor was he in the afternoon's conflict mediation workshop. By the time dinner came around, Vell had already begun checking the campus medical logs. As an exchange student, he had no official access to human medical files. Yet he located Daniel through indirect means. A maintenance drone had logged a cleanup request outside Dormitory C after a physical altercation. Vell waited at the cafeteria again, tray untouched, until Daniel finally arrived, walking stiffly and holding his tray with his left hand. Vell stood. "You require assistance?" "I'm good," Daniel said, settling into the seat across from him. "Really, just took a weird step on the stairs." "You said you tripped yesterday. Did you also fall again today?" Vell asked. Daniel gave him a look. "You ever heard of letting something go?" "Yes, but I do not consider that an ethical choice when my colleague is visibly injured." Daniel sighed and shifted in his seat, wincing. Vell noticed the bruising had spread. His knuckles were purple now, the swelling worse. There was a line of scraped skin along his jaw too, partly healed but unmistakable. Vell said nothing more that evening. Instead, he requested a private meeting with Instructor Yallen, the Academy's alien-human liaison. "He's not reporting an incident," Yallen said, arms folded. "We can't force him to seek treatment if he doesn't want to. He is injured, possibly from repeated conflict." Yallen frowned. "You're suggesting he's fighting?" "I am stating that the pattern of injuries supports that conclusion." Yallen tapped her console. "Rourke is on a non-combat scholarship. He's here for diplomacy training. If he's getting into fights, that's a serious violation." "I do not wish to report him," Vell said, antennae stiff with uncertainty. "I wish to help him." Instructor Yallen gave him a look that Vell had come to recognize as human sympathy. "I'll reach out to him." That night, Daniel knocked on his door. Vell opened it to find him standing there, still cradling his right hand. "You told Yallen." "I informed her of your injuries." Daniel sighed. "Okay, I wasn't looking for a babysitter." "But thanks, I guess. You are always welcome." Daniel stepped inside, sat down heavily on the long, cushioned platform the Academy called a neutral species resting bench. For a moment, he looked like he might say nothing. Then, slowly, he unwrapped the cloth bandage around his hand. Vell leaned in. "You should be in medical." "I went. Earlier today. Nothing's broken, just soft tissue trauma." "From what?" Daniel hesitated. "There's this guy, another student, name's Colvin, from the Thress contingent." Vell's eyes widened. "Thress are not known to initiate violence." "He didn't, not technically." Daniel flexed his hand, sucking in a breath. "He made a comment about humans, about our history, said we were genetically prone to self-destruction. That we shouldn't be trusted with galactic diplomacy. And so you struck him." "No, I let it go. That time," Vell tilted his head. "You are implying there were multiple encounters." Daniel nodded. "He kept pushing, asking if we still glorify war, if we romanticize suffering. He said you can't trust a species that treats pain like a badge of honor. Many aliens feel that way. Yeah, Daniel said. But then he brought up my dad, unprovoked. Said any species that sends their own children to die in foreign deserts for resources must be fundamentally broken. Vell was silent, so I hit him. Vell blinked. You struck him with your fist. Yeah, one punch, I didn't even think about it. Did he retaliate? No. Just looked at me like I'd confirmed everything he said. There was a long pause. Then Daniel said, I'm getting kicked out, aren't I? Vell stood. I do not believe so, but you must explain the circumstances fully. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. It wasn't just about him, my dad. He's not here anymore. He was in the last Earth conflict. Afghanistan, came back with half a lung and nightmares. He never lifted a hand against me, but I've seen him punch holes in drywall when the noise got too loud. You were defending his memory. Yeah. Maybe, or maybe I just lost it. Vell sat beside him. I cannot tell you what the correct action would have been, but I can tell you this. Reacting to provocation with violence is not unique to humans. Many species struggle with it, my own included. The difference is in how we reconcile it afterward. Daniel didn't respond. He just stared at his knuckles again. Over the next week, Daniel's injuries worsened. The Academy's medical scans had shown no fractures, but the swelling persisted. When he finally agreed to a follow-up, the radiologist found a small hairline fracture in his fourth metacarpal, the bone behind his ring finger. You need to immobilize it, the nurse said. Splint and rest. No strenuous activity for at least 4 weeks. Daniel stared at the splint like it was a personal failure. Vell visited him daily. Sometimes with protein-infused Thress paste, which Daniel hated but ate anyway. Other times with translated volumes of alien philosophy. Once he brought a puzzle cube from his homeworld that had no solution, just patterns that shifted endlessly. Daniel turned it in his left hand for hours. One afternoon, Instructor Yallen summoned them both. I spoke with the Thress delegation, she said. Colvin has declined to file a complaint. He says he provoked you intentionally and that the physical response was illuminating. Daniel looked surprised. He said that. He also said he would like to debate you, publicly. Vell leaned forward. A debate? Yes, on the subject of humanity's role in diplomacy. He believes it would be educational. Daniel looked uncertain. His hand was still wrapped in the splint, and his eyes had the tired edge of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. You want me to get up in front of the whole academy and argue that we're not a threat? No, Yallen said. We want you to speak honestly. That's what diplomacy is. The debate was scheduled for the following week. The auditorium was full. Students from 18 species, instructors, even a few visiting diplomats. Vell sat in the front row, antennae forward. Colvin opened with a calm, almost bored tone. Humans have advanced rapidly in the last few centuries, but your history is written in conflict. You spread across your world not with curiosity but conquest. Even your myths celebrate violence. Daniel stepped to the podium. His right hand was still splinted. He didn't use it. You're not wrong, he said. Our history is violent. We've done terrible things. A pause. But we remember them. We study them. We build memorials and teach our kids about the mistakes. We have people who dedicate their lives to preventing those mistakes from happening again. That's not proof of corruption. That's proof of growth. Colvin tilted his head. And yet, when insulted, you struck me. Daniel nodded. Yeah, I did, and I regret it. But that moment doesn't define all of us. You judged my entire species off one action. That's the same kind of thinking that leads to the worst parts of our history. The hall was silent. Vell watched as Colvin gave a slight nod, then stepped back without further comment. Afterward, students approached Daniel, some with questions, others with quiet thank yous. Not everyone agreed with him, but they listened. Weeks passed. Daniel's hand healed slowly. He never punched anything again. But he started working with Yallen on conflict training, speaking to new students about emotional regulation across species. One day, As Vell and Daniel walked through the arboretum, Daniel said, "You know, I still think about what he said. About pain being like a badge." Vell glanced over. "Do you believe that? I think. Maybe we wear it because we're afraid of what it means to take it off." Vell considered this. "Then perhaps healing is not about hiding the pain but understanding why we carry it." Daniel looked down at his hand. The bruises were gone. The bone had mended. But he still flexed it sometimes, like remembering. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe it is." The cafeteria's ambient hum was louder around midday, a mix of translator chirps, utensil chatter, and the wet clicking of the three-jawed Corallans trying to pronounce vowels. Daniel sat with his left hand wrapped around a cup of something that smelled like moss and tasted worse. Vell had insisted it was good for inflammation, though it wasn't clear whether he meant physical or emotional. Across the table, Vell was adjusting the microprojector embedded in his collar. Its lens clicked as it realigned, projecting a flickering lattice of shapes above his tray. He didn't look up. "You're quiet," Daniel said. "I am calculating something." Daniel rested his elbow on the table. "Please don't be simulating my punching technique again." "I am not. I am analyzing social tolerance thresholds across species, specifically how much verbal provocation can be delivered before a physical response is triggered." Daniel squinted. "You're trying to graph how much someone can poke the bear," metaphor acknowledged. "Yes, why? So that I may understand why you responded when you did and not earlier." Daniel leaned back. "It wasn't a calculation." "Exactly," Vell said, eyes still on the projection, "which is what makes it fascinating." A tall, sinuous figure approached their table. Shimmery skin like molten glass and an angular stride that never quite matched the floor's rhythm. Narek. From the Zalari diplomatic cohort, he stopped just beside Daniel, arms folded behind his back in the Zalari posture of inquiry. "I overheard your debate," Narek said. "You articulated your species' volatility with more self-awareness than expected." "Thanks, I guess," Daniel said, raising an eyebrow. "I am curious," Narek continued. "Would you strike me if I insulted your mother?" Daniel gave a short laugh. "Only if you were standing next to my uncle." "He'd beat me to it." "I do not understand." "Exactly," Daniel said, sipping the moss drink and immediately regretting it. "Look, it's not about the insult itself, it's the way it lands. Who says it? What's behind it? You can't map that." Vell tilted his head. "But we must try. Otherwise, diplomacy becomes guesswork." "Sometimes it is," Daniel said. Narek blinked his secondary eyes. "You accept imprecision, not accept, just deal with it. We improvise." Narek tapped one finger against his hip, considering. "That is statistically chaotic." Daniel grinned. "Welcome to humanity." That evening, the Academy's Cross-Cultural Housing Committee met in one of the larger Arboretum domes. The air was thick with the scent of blooming Arla ferns, and the seating had been rearranged into a loose spiral to accommodate the various body plans present. Daniel arrived late, holding a datapad in his left hand and a thermal wrap around his right. The splint had been removed that morning, but the fracture was still healing. Vell sat beside him, nodding toward the center. "New proposal, rotational communal kitchens." Daniel scanned the list. "Wait, they want us to share cooking duties?" "Every 10-day cycle," Vell said. "Each species prepares a meal for the others." Does anyone remember the last time a human tried to cook Zalari grain paste? "We almost lost 2 students to salt poisoning." From across the spiral, a short, broad-shouldered dreen raised a spatula. "That was your fault. Your measuring units are inconsistent. We use cups," Daniel muttered. "It's not our fault you think a scoop is a universal standard." The discussion spiraled into a debate on kitchen safety protocols, interspecies allergies, and the appropriate storage temperature for flarn eggs. Daniel mostly listened, occasionally tapping notes into his pad with his thumb. When the meeting ended, he lingered outside the dome, watching the artificial stars flicker in the simulated night sky. Vell joined him after a moment, hands tucked into his robe sleeves. "You did not object as strongly as usual." Daniel shrugged. "I'm learning when to pick my battles." That is growth or exhaustion. A long silence. Vell said, "Your hand is not fully healed." "Nah," Daniel said. "Still aches when I hold things too tight. You should avoid strain. Tell that to my coursework." "I've got 2 simulations this week and a capstone draft due." "You have peers. Ask for assistance." Daniel turned to face him. "You offering to type for me?" Vell blinked. "I do not possess sufficient appendages for human keyboards." "Then I'll struggle through." "It's fine." "Your definition of fine concerns me," Daniel smiled. "It always has." The next afternoon, during the emotional mapping seminar, the instructor, a soft-shelled Calari with a voice like humming water, assigned a pair exercise. Each student was to describe a moment of extreme emotional discomfort and allow their partner to map the perceived emotional spectrum using the shared neural interface pads. Vell and Daniel were paired, naturally. Daniel looked at the neural interface pad with visible distaste. "I still think this thing feels like sticking a jellyfish to my head." "You exaggerate," Vell said, aligning his own pad. "Jellyfish are gelatinous and lack consistent electrical output. The interface is quite stable, still slimy." They sat across from each other, pads synced. Vell blinked slowly. "Describe your moment." Daniel hesitated. "When I was 6, my mom lost me in a grocery store. One second I was near her, the next I was by the cereal aisle, and everything was too big and loud. I thought I'd been abandoned." Vell's antennae twitched as his pad lit with color gradients. "Fear, disorientation, shame, not shame," Daniel said. "I was 6. "Then why does the mapping show suppression?" Daniel looked away. "Because by the time she found me, I was trying not to cry. I didn't want to look weak." Vell tapped a sequence into the pad. "This is informative. Your species begins emotional regulation far earlier than ours. Not regulation, just hiding. That distinction may not exist neurologically." Daniel frowned. "Maybe not. But it matters." Later that week, at the interspecies ethics panel, Daniel was invited to join a discussion on non-retaliation protocols. He sat between a frilled Orvani and a stone-skinned Naghul, both of whom had never been in a physical confrontation in their lives. The Orvani began. "We believe that escalation is always the failure of reason." Daniel nodded slowly. "Sure, but not everyone escalates from the same baseline." The Naghul rumbled. "Then where do we anchor our mutual expectations?" Daniel tapped the table. "Intent, not just action. If someone lashes out, we don't just look at the punch. We ask why it happened, what built up to it." The Orvani frowned. "That introduces ambiguity." "Exactly," Daniel said. "People aren't equations. They're contexts." Afterward, as the panel dissolved into networking clusters, Rourke found him again. "You implied earlier that humans improvise, but now you argue for context. Isn't that a contradiction?" "No," Daniel said. "Improv is just navigating context when you don't have a script." Rourke considered this. "That is unexpectedly elegant. You're welcome." As the semester approached its final arc, Daniel's name began to circulate in quiet, curious tones. Not because he had punched someone, but because he hadn't run from the aftermath. He had stayed, explained, adjusted. Even when his hand still ached during the cold simulations in the polar dome, or when Colvin passed by without acknowledging him. One evening, back in the dormitory lounge, Vell handed him a folded piece of paper, a novelty among students who lived by data streams. Daniel unfolded it. Inside was a hand-drawn graph. The axes were unlabeled, the curve erratic. "What am I looking at?" "My attempt to model your emotional response sequence," Vell said. "It defies all prediction," Daniel laughed. "So I broke your algorithm, you did. Gloriously." He tucked the paper into his notebook. "Guess we're not so easy to quantify, indeed. But perhaps that is not a flaw." Daniel leaned back, stretching his arm carefully. "You know, back home, people would have just told me to walk it off, pretend the pain didn't exist. And here I had to explain it, sit with it. Let someone else see it." Vell's antennae tilted in agreement. "Pain shared is pain translated." Daniel looked over. "That's almost poetic." I adapted it from a Corland proverb. Their version involves sap and fire beetles. Daniel laughed again. Of course it does. The Academy's North Campus courtyard was unusually quiet for midday. A soft breeze stirred the prayer flags strung between the observation towers, their alien scripts fluttering like whispering secrets. Daniel sat cross-legged on a low bench carved from some kind of cool, porous stone. His right hand, free of the splint now, rested on his thigh, fingers slightly swollen but functional. He was rolling a smooth stone between his knuckles slowly, cautiously, the way someone retrains a hand that doesn't fully trust itself yet. Vell approached from the side path, carrying a folded schematic under one arm and a shallow container balanced effortlessly on the other. He stopped in front of Daniel and set both down. "You missed the Joint Species Mediation Lab." Daniel looked up, then nodded. Didn't feel like listening to a roomful of people argue about whose apology protocols are more respectful. That was the assignment, and I read the packet. The Driel expect a bow, the Zalari prefer a 3-part regret phrase, and the Ternari demand you acknowledge the emotional impact before the factual error. I'm just not in the mood to rehearse guilt in 4 languages. Vell sat beside him, careful not to disturb the stone Daniel was still turning over. "You are frustrated," Daniel exhaled through his nose. "I'm tired, not just physically, all of it, the explaining, the second-guessing every reaction. I feel like I've been walking on eggshells since the thing with Colvin. You have not struck anyone since." "Yeah, but the tension doesn't go away just because I didn't hit someone this week." Vell opened the container. Inside was a pale green paste with thin black filaments suspended in it. "Food from my region," he said. "It neutralizes stress hormones in my species. Its effect on humans is unstudied but harmless." Daniel took a cautious bite. "Tastes like a mint leaf chewed through a sock." "That is not inaccurate." They sat in silence for a moment, the wind pulling gently at the edges of Vell's robe. "You know what really gets me?" Daniel said. "Nobody ever asked me what I wanted from all this." "Not even once. You wanted to prove something? I thought I did." Daniel rolled the stone across his knuckles again, slower this time. "But it turns out I didn't come here to fight our reputation. I just wanted to be seen as more than it." Vell considered this. "Do you believe you are?" "Some days, yeah. Other days, I feel like a walking cautionary tale." "You are not the only one who struggles with perception. Among my people, I am considered too emotionally porous." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You mean you care too much, correct?" "It is seen as a risk to judgment. Too much empathy can blur boundaries." Daniel laughed faintly. "We'd call that being human. Yet among your kind, you often hide it." Daniel didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "Because if we didn't, we'd be crushed under it." They stayed there until the shadow of the western tower stretched long across the courtyard. Later that evening, around first meal preparation time, Daniel was slicing root vegetables in the shared kitchen. He held the knife in his left hand, awkward but improving. Vell stood over a simmering pot, stirring with a long-handled utensil made of polished bone. The kitchen was empty except for them and a pair of Zarin twins trying to figure out how to toast something without setting off the humidity alarms. "You're cutting unevenly," Vell observed. "I'm not left-handed." "Then it is fortunate you possess 2 functional hands." Daniel held up his right, barely, still stiff. "You should continue your rehabilitation exercises." "I am." They worked in companionable quiet. The air filled with the scent of stewed thorn tubers and seared protein discs. "I got a message from Colvin," Daniel said suddenly. Vell didn't pause in his stirring. "What did he say?" "He's leaving the academy. Transferring to a longer-term placement on one of the border embassies. That is not uncommon for Thres students after their second term." He said he learned something surprising. "That we aren't as predictable as he thought." "That is a compliment in Thres dialect," I figured. Daniel scraped the last of the sliced roots into a container. "I'm not mad he's leaving, just feels weird that all of it happened and now it's over. No fanfare. No closure." Closure is not always marked by ceremony. Sometimes it is simply the absence of further conflict. Daniel looked down at the vegetables. Feels a little anticlimactic. That is peace. They ate together in the courtyard, joined eventually by two Dreel and a Zalari who sat at a respectful distance. No one brought up the past weeks. No one asked about bruises or debates or disciplinary hearings. The silence wasn't awkward. It just was. 3 days later, Daniel stood in front of the Academy's central archive, datapad in hand. The final submission for his conflict mediation coursework. He stared at the blinking cursor under the heading, Personal Reflection, Growth Through Adversity. He tapped the pad with the tip of his stylus, then looked up as Vell approached. "You are procrastinating," Vell said. "Just thinking. You have already considered this topic extensively." "Yeah, but I don't want to write something that just sounds good. I want it to be honest." "Then begin with honesty." Daniel started typing. "I used to think strength was about not reacting. About holding it together no matter what. But I've learned that sometimes strength is knowing when you've failed and being willing to own it. It's not about being above emotion, it's about understanding what it does and choosing what to do with it." He paused and looked at Vell. "Too dramatic." "It is accurate." He hit send. That night they walked the perimeter path of the South Gardens. The torches lining the path flickered with real flame, not artificial light. Daniel traced the newly healed scar across his knuckle with one thumb. It had faded to a faint line. "I don't regret punching him," he said. "That surprises me. I regret the reason, that I felt like I had to, that I didn't know how else to make someone see me as more than a stereotype. Perhaps now you do. Maybe. I'm still figuring it out." They stopped at the edge of the garden, where the earth dropped away into a shallow gorge filled with luminous moss. The Academy dome above shimmered with the refracted light of distant satellites. "You know," Daniel said, "when I first got here I thought I had to represent all of humanity, like everything I said or did would echo back on the species. It often does." "Yeah, but that's not the point. I was trying to be a symbol. And I forgot I'm just a person." "That realization is why you are still here," Daniel nodded. "Guess I'm not such a cautionary tale after all. You are still a tale, just not the one you expected." They stood there a moment longer, then turned back toward the path. The moss glowed behind them, pulsing gently with the rhythm of the artificial wind. Vell glanced sideways. "Your next course rotation includes applied empathy workshops." Daniel groaned. "Does that mean more jellyfish hats?" "Yes," he sighed. "I'll bring conditioner this time." They walked on, footsteps quiet over the moss-dusted stones, the night around them calm and unmarred, nothing left unspoken, nothing unresolved.